My name is Suzanne Atwell. I am co-chair of the Decide the Date petition campaign and a former mayor of the city of Sarasota. My co-chair, Larry Eager, was not able to be here today. Who is Decide the Date Sarasota? We are a local group of citizen volunteers, business owners, elected officials, former elected officials, and organizations concerned with lower voter turnout. We are nonpartisan. We have Democrats, we have Republicans, independents, no party affiliation. We range from liberal to moderate to conservative. This is a single issue petition. This proposed amendment would move the city elections from spring of odd-numbered years to fall of even-numbered years. The city commission elections would coincide with the regular elections of county, state, and federal officials. It is anticipated that this move will increase voter participation from a 15 to 23% turnout to a 50 to 72% turnout. That's more than twice the amount of local citizens participating in our government. What's more is that African American participation will more than double. Hispanic participation in city elections will almost triple. And the same goes for voters 29 years and younger. They will almost triple as well. That alone would be enough to pose the question to the voters. What's more, however, is that we will all save around $100,000 per election cycle. That's $100,000 of taxpayers' dollars saved by a simple shift in the calendar. So it's important to know that this petition was designed to ensure that the final election will always be in November, no matter how many people run and no matter what percentage of the vote a candidate gets in the primary. November has the greatest turnout and will see the largest number of our citizens having the final say in who is elected. For districted commission seats, if two people run for a district seat, the election, again, will always be in November. If more than two run for a district seat, there shall be an August primary coinciding with the county, state, and federal primaries. The two top vote getters, without regard to the percentage of the votes they get, will advance to a November election. There is no ability to outright win the election in the primary. So for at-large seats, if three people run for two at-large seats, the election will be in November. If four or more people run for the at-large seats, there will be an August primary. And the top three vote getters will advance to the November election without regard to the percentage of votes they receive. There is no ability, do I have a couple more seconds? There is no ability to outright win the election in the primary. Also, this language changes the election for mayor and vice mayor to coincide with the November election dates. The Decide the Date campaign was launched on December 12th with a presentation to the city clerk. 5 months later, on May 11th, 1 month prior to the deadline, the final batch was dropped off at the supervisor election. 1 week later, city clerk received the certification. And not only had we achieved in getting the necessary petitions to get this initiative on the ballot, but we had 996 petitions over what we needed. That's right, another 27% over what was needed. The support was overwhelming and it's significant. This petition meets the charter requirements to set this question on the November ballot. So we all look forward to a timely process and having voters decide the date this November. So now I'd like to turn this presentation over to Kevin Cooper. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. She just stated Kevin Cooper, Treasurer from this campaign. And because it's largely ministerial, what I did want to do tonight is come before you and kind of discuss some of the demographic profile of those people that signed the petition. So as you go through deliberations, you can understand who the people are that signed this petition. As she said, the 25% more than was necessary. And I'll put this on the overhead to start. So give you a sense, the big one, right, the political party affiliation of the individuals that signed the petition. overwhelmingly associated with registered Democrats. Almost 53% of those almost 4,800 individuals in the city of Sarasota that signed up were registered Democrats. Almost 34% registered Republicans, and 13% other, that's no party affiliation, Libertarian, Green Party, and the like. And why this is particularly interesting, as I go to this, is to juxtapose this to just general registered voters in the city of Sarasota. As you'll see, it's a pretty representative pie, with the exception of the fact that you have a standout in the Democrat support for it. I wouldn't offer a reason why, other than just the city itself is just predominantly Democrat. And so you're more likely to run into a Democrat than you are any other political affiliation. And so it's likely, as we were knocking on doors and walking around the city, it's more likely that we'll run into those individuals. So as you see, it's fairly representative of the city as a whole from a political party standpoint. Second piece, and I think Mayor Atwell talked about this a bit, was the race of those who signed the petition. A little over 83% of those who signed the petition were white. A little over 10% were African American, and then you had a little under 3% Hispanic, and a little over 3.5% of other. Fairly decently representative of the census data itself for the city of Sarasota. Again, the pies are slightly skewed, a little underrepresented from the African American population. The nice thing is, from that perspective, though, when you go to the actual those who vote in your elections, as you can see, and I think Mayor Atwell talked a little bit about it, the underrepresentation of minorities in the city election, which is really problematic. In your spring elections, you have about a 4.75% African American representation, as opposed to almost double that in the fall, which is kind of representative of what we saw in our petition campaign. Finally, just from a geographic standpoint, just to show where we were geographically, here's who signed the petition geographically. Just about 50% of those folks that signed our petition were in District 2, almost an even split in Districts 1 and 3. It would seem it was skewed towards District 2, but as you all are aware, and as those at home are aware, will be aware if they're not already, that's just another good governance question for another day. When you have at-large elections, why you have one district that's so disproportionately skewed in terms of registered voters. It's kind of bizarre that you have two districts that are equally represented and you have one that is so disproportionately represented. But again, the pie looks fairly similar and representative of the community. So I think one of the things and I'm not one to pat ourselves on the back for anything, but I think what we saw is that the petition campaign was fairly representative of the community in and of itself, from a race standpoint, from an age standpoint, from a political disposition standpoint, and from a geographic standpoint. We did our work to make sure that it wasn't skewed towards one population or another, that it was largely representative of the city. And I think as you all move into your deliberation, I think that's an important piece to be noted in your conversation. So thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I appreciate you all.
Thank you. Susan Chapman. My name is Susan Chapman. I'm a long-term resident of the city of Sarasota. I have been a citizen of this city since 1989, and I'm here to talk about your duties under the charter and with regard to this particular petition. And your duties under the charter are to have a clear, concise, and accurate description of this election. And we heard it again, some things that are not exactly accurate. It's not one date for the election, it's 2 dates. So it's changing the dates with plural. And that's important because this has been marketed, and I was approached many times by paid petition gatherers saying we're interested in increasing voter turnout. Well, there are 2 elections that we're talking about. And the election in August, which coincides with the primary, which this petition calls the first election, is ironically the election in which the voters have the most choice of candidates. And it has the lowest turnout. It has even lower turnout than in the March and May elections. And so in terms of turnout, there is one date where turnout may be increased. That's the the general election, and then there's another election in which turnout will be decreased, and that's something that has to be addressed. And the reason it has to be addressed, it needs to be accurate for the voters to make a decision, because, as I said, the election in which the voters have the most choice of candidates is the election in which the turnout is lowest. The other interesting thing about the August election is traditionally it has a segmented turnout dominated by one political party, because one political party tends to have more primary oppositional elections, more candidates in the primary elections. It also has the lowest turnout because our seasonal residents are not here. And I'm not saying that as an argument on the election. I'm saying that that is your duty to have a clear, concise, and truthful presentation when you start with the language. I think the public needs to know that there are two elections and the differences between the two different dates when we're changing the dates. I wouldn't call it deciding a date. I would call it changing the dates of the elections, because there are two elections, one where the turnout will be lower and a segmented voter population, and one where the turnout could be higher. And so I would ask you, when you are considering the language to present to the public to vote on, that you consider that this is about more than just turnout in the November election. Thank you. And by the way, I want to thank you all for participating in Arbor Day. I got my tree on Saturday.
Because former Commissioner Chapman's data is just not accurate. And just to correct the record for anybody who's listening, I'll give you an example just of the last city election and the last August primary. The last August primary had a higher percentage of voter turnout than both of the off-cycle elections, the one that I ran in. Last August's primary was 24%, and March was only 19%. The May was only 22%. And she also mentioned partisan breakdown, and that wasn't accurate what she said either. In the city of Sarasota, the August primary, which was 24.4%, actually had 15,000 Democrats turn out compared to 11,000 Republicans in the city.
So in the interest of clarity in the summary, I think we should include the word November in here as far as the election goes, so that people understand that there will be an election in August and in November.
That's part of what we'll talk about when the ordinance is in front of you, in 2 weeks.
Is this something, because I mentioned that I thought we should look at the citywide, the two at-large districts or the one at-large district to be divided into two different races. You would still have the at-large, but you'd have a District 4 and a District 5. Is this something that could be added to this or no?
We first need a second, and then I guess the commission may go into discussion, but we have a motion on the floor to receive the report.
Is there a second?
Well, this is kind of part of the conversation.
Well, you still need a second. It's a motion. You still need a second. And then
I can answer your question. It's a separate issue.
Okay.
I mean, I can second.
You can't add it to this.
It
It
doesn't
wasn't
need a
part of the
second
petition.
because it's going to come back in 60 days anyway. I mean, the language it has to come by time. So we're going to.
Discuss that after this at some point. If you wanted to put it on the agenda, say after November when this was decided, or after the fall, that could be a separate conversation. That might be something the commission wants to, by ordinance,
We have
put on the ballot.
to change the ordinance again, though, right?
You'd have to change the charter, but it would be a separate ballot question to change that requirement, to separate the two at-large seats to vote separately.
All right. Any
We have a
other?
motion, Madam Mayor. Do we have a second?
I seconded it.
I'll just speak to the motion, I guess. Then I just wanted to applaud all of your efforts. Former mayor and public defender Larry Eager chaired this thing, and I thought, are really doing something good for our community. Hopefully this is successful and we will see greater participation, diversity in our city elections. I appreciate you.
Ready, Mayor?
Commissioners, is that your vote?
Yes.
Yes. All right, thank you. Before we adjourn, I got a couple of things I wanted to bring up. Can we get the truck issue on a